Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. Yeah, it's going to be one of those videos. Strap yourselves in. I'm going to essentially be chucking out blame all over the place today. If there's anyone that you think is at fault, don't worry. They are probably going to be massively have the finger pointed at them during this video. I should start by saying Happy New Year, because Tottenham Hotspur certainly did their best to ensure it was an unhappy start to the new year for everyone connected to them. I felt so sorry for it. It was a sold-out stadium yesterday, and honestly, I felt so sorry for the utter dross that they were served up to start the year. Why can't Spurs just do things in a straightforward manner? Why can't they just start the new year, January the 1st, new year, new Tottenham, 2023... but there was always this kind of chance that they were going to absolutely chuck it away. Yeah. If I look knackered, it's because I am. I already obviously had a rather late night with New Year's Eve the night before. And then last night I got in and I just had to pour a lot of frustrations into a massively long article. 5,000 word feature. I was writing till about 1:30 last night to go out this morning. If you've read it, thank you very much. If you haven't, feel free to. Find out my Twitter account or whatever. Facebook page, yeah, I've got a journalist Facebook page as well. But if you don't want to read, which may be very understandable, then I'm going to try to cover a lot of it in this as well. Oh my goodness. Where to start? You kind of have to laugh because it's so ridiculous. There was an irony as well, I think, of people feeling a bit kind of knackered and maybe not so sprightly yesterday after New Year's Eve. But I didn't expect the performance to be like that. It was like flat. It's like everyone was hungover. Honestly, you go through that match. You had a terrible home defeat, really, really poor. A bench with not a single attacking player on it, which was weird in every aspect. Weird that the club do not have the strength and depth in their squad to do it, and weird that Conte just kind of wanted to send such a message that he didn't even pick a young striker to go on the bench. A Will Lancashire, Jamie Donnelly, whatever, just so you had that option. It was all like, oh, really? Okay, this is how we're going to go. There were chants for Daniel Levy to get out of our club. The chants. Antonio Conte throwing out lengthy, hypocritical statements after the game, just while making sure everyone knew that, pretty much he was saying, I had informed everyone last summer that it was going to be rubbish. So thank you, Antonio. Yes, thank you. That's it's not good. It's really not good at all. I think probably the most miserable performance of the season. I think some people might say this about this video afterwards. But yeah, it was dross. It was absolute rubbish. And the trouble is when he started his press conference yesterday, eventually, we're going to talk about that later, he kind of spent the opening section praising the team and their efforts. And I'm just sitting there kind of going like, no, Antonio, no, stop. But yeah, I tell you, I'll read the quotes. I've got the quotes from that little section where I was kind of like, please stop, because this is rubbish. I'm not disappointed because the performance was a good performance. From the start to the end, I've seen the right commitment, the right intensity, the right desire to get 3 points, to win duels, to press high, to run. No. If you ask me, football is a bit strange because in the first half we dominated the game, but despite this we didn't create chances to score because we found a team that defended really deep with 11 players. Yes. It helps if you can create chances to score at home. In the second half, we started the same way, but then it happened that we conceded another goal. In this period, we are not so lucky for the goals we are conceding. I think this goal has changed the situation, changed the feeling of the players, the confidence of the players, because they didn't deserve to be 1-0 down after a big effort for the whole first half. Then in other circumstances, I think he means in other games, we were good to come back. Today, we didn't do this. Then the atmosphere becomes warm because you're 1-0 down. Warm's one word for it. And the expectation is to score goals and to win. Yes, Antonio, that's the expectation in most football matches. Then you can pay something emotionally. I want to stress, before we get into this, if anyone thinks that I'm only going to dig out Antonio Conte in this, I really am going to. There's a lot of Conte, the chairman, the board, the players. So yeah, don't worry. It's if you haven't read the article, if you have read the article, you know what's coming. If you haven't read the article, then yeah, I'm still trying to get my head around it. It's such a mess. It really is such a mess. Spurs were poor. There's no dressing it up. We're talking about how well they ran. Sorry, 60,000 plus people don't pay up to go and see Tottenham run. That's not what they do. Here's the stats for you. 6 shots at goal, Tottenham, compared to Aston Villa's 13. And Spurs only put 2 of those on target. Honestly, Robin Olsen in the Villa goal, it wasn't even Emi Martinez in the Villa goal. It was Robin Olsen coming in. He'd been in, I think, the previous match as well. Probably had the easiest afternoon of his career between the sticks. Honestly, I'm trying to remember a save he had to make. I think Sonny hit a free kick that was very comfortable for him. That's the only one off the top of my head I can think of. Yeah, because even Kane's header, I think it was Young headed it off the line. Even he didn't have anything to do with it. Shocking. Absolutely shocking. And the thing that annoys me the most is that if you're going to go, and it was 10 games in a row now, Spurs have gone behind first, conceded the first goal. That's a disgrace in itself. But also, if you're going to do that and you know you're a team that is going to do that, you've got to score at the other end. You have to. And that is at least something they've been able to do in all of these games. They never looked capable. Honestly, I'm trying to wrap my head while I'm talking, trying to think of real moments of quality. There was a little link up between Brian Hill and Matt Doherty in the first half. I thought, okay, that's nice. There was a little link up between Sonny and Kane, and Sonny just overhit it to him at the last moment. Other than that, I'm really struggling, other than a couple of half dangerous, even Perisic crosses, to think of too much. I was Basuma one to Perisic that he sliced over. Honestly, you would not have known Spurs were the home team for long periods, other than the fact they just passed the ball around a bit between themselves. And this is where, for everything else that's being said, and we're going to come to a lot of that, the chants and everything, Antonio Conte has to take, and the players, but Antonio Conte has to take a portion of the blame. I get the impression he's a guy that maybe doesn't like the finger being turned towards him, and doesn't. He's one of those, well, if it's my fault, I'm off, kind of thing, which he's trying to do against Burnley last season. It's like one of those guys that's like, oh, if you don't like my game, I'm taking my ball with me and I'm going home. I get the impression he is a little bit like that. But he's got to, because Spurs they just didn't look like a team that had a plan. They didn't look like a team that knew how to attack a team that defends deep. And how many times have we said that about Tottenham in the past? This is not even exclusive just to this manager either. Look, Conte's going to have a lot of fans still behind him. And I think rightly so, because of what he did last season. It was a really terrific turnaround. And I think, his past obviously also dictates a certain degree of, a lot of respect really for his past as well. So I think he'll have these fans behind him. And I think even more so if this January transfer window becomes frustrating as it drags on. But what I would say is the more painful performances we all have to watch, and yesterday afternoon was right up there among them, I think the more attention is going to be turned towards him. It's quite interesting. The BBC article, we were all in a press conference, we were like, ooh, no one's gone that way. But then it got changed later on. The BBC intro for their report from the game actually said something about heaping the pressure on Antonio Conte to defeat. And we're a bit like, I don't know if that's the case. But it was interesting. And I do wonder whether more attention will start to turn towards that. If the performances continue in like this kind of really flat, woeful way. And people are going to ask the questions like, which Tottenham Hotspur players has he actually improved? That will be a question that becomes asked. I was trying to think this yesterday. I do think there are players that improved. I think Ben Davies has improved. People are going, oh, God, it's the first one you've gone to. But it's just the one that springs to mind. Kulusevski and Bentancur, I think, are better players than they were at Juventus. I think Sonny, I know he's having a tough time of it now, but I do think second half of last season was probably the best version of Sonny we've seen, and that was under Conte. I think Højbjerg has become a better player, and I know he was poor yesterday, but I think he's become a better player, an all-round player than he previously was. Before his injury, I felt he was bringing along Oliver Skip as well. I guess Christian Romero is a difficult one. Christian Romero obviously had a brilliant season where he was Serie A Player of the Year, so it's a difficult one to say he's really brought him on, but then I guess he's a World Cup winner now. Is that coincidence? I don't know. Hugo Lloris and Eric Dyer did have very consistent seasons under him last season, but obviously both have had differing fortunes this season. I think this is the issue as well, is that, honestly, I was just trying to think as well. It's been a while since we've heard Antonio chanted out as well. And I think that says a lot about the performances. I was trying to think the last time I heard that. That used to be a regular thing every week. Pretty much you'd be hearing it and he'd go out and he'd clap all sides of the stadium as well. I think the attention is going to start to turn there at the moment, and I understand and I agree to a fair degree that a lot of the attention is going towards the owners and discontent built up over 20 years, and I get that 100%. But I do think that Conte can't escape blame as well. He shouldn't be hiding behind that. I think he needs to take a portion of this blame as well. And, anyone that's watched these before knows this winds me up. But you can tell he's getting a little bit desperate when he reverts to this old, I performed a miracle last season, in dragging this little club up into the top four. It's obviously it's not exactly what he said, but it's kind of the way he said it. He said this, was it in the summer? I can't remember who it was. You probably know better than me, but he came out with this before. We haven't heard it for a little while, but just in the last week, it seems to have reappeared. It's almost like, shots are being fired kind of thing, and he started to be like, this is my defence, this is my defence. Look, there's no doubting, as I said earlier, Conte did a great job in turning Spurs around last season. Honestly, fantastic job. But I do feel that he glosses over the fact that Spurs finished in the top four in 4 of the 6 seasons before he came. They finished third, second, third in 3 of those seasons as well. So, look, I do think he did a terrific job, and there's no doubting it. I think he deserved a lot of praise for what he did, and obviously the Kulusevski and Bentancur signings really helped change things for him as well. But to make out this thing that Spurs are this little club that he's done a huge favour to, I don't like it. I never did. And I feel that every time he uses that argument, he's kind of belittling everything that came before. I'm not a massive fan of that one whatsoever. Look, he does need help off the pitch with the right players as well. I 100% agree that, and I think a lot of his transfer stuff that he comes out with, whether it's indirectly or directly, mostly indirectly is the way he works, is right, and I do think it's correct. I do think it was embarrassing that Spurs didn't have an attacking player available yesterday. You could argue he had 3 attackers out, but still, I do think he needs those players. What I would say is the reason he needs those players is because he has such a rigid set system. He said it himself, I have my way. And if people don't like it, that's their tough, essentially. And that applies to his system as well. You'll hear me say multiple times, he needs this, he needs the right wing backs or whatever to make his system work. He needs the right central midfielders to make his system work. And I guess if you're going to look at that with a slightly negative view, it is. It's because it's a rigid system. There's not an adaptability. There's not an ability to, I guess, handle the circumstances and change what you're doing to fit, which is, it's not really been the case. He has changed things. People at Inter will tell you, I think second half of the title-winning season there, that Eriksen came into it. I think someone told me the other day it was a change born of necessity, but he did adapt. He brought Eriksen in. They had like a midfield three, and it transformed. They absolutely ran away with the league second half of the season. I think at Chelsea, he adapted as well. Changed up things with defence, I think it was. I was trying to remember now. So he can do it. But I almost feel at Tottenham, he's pretty much just said, this is what I'm doing. It's like almost like a Dalek. This is what I am doing. Give me the players to fit this system and I can exterminate. Or something like that. But I don't know where that was going. But yeah, I do feel like all eyes are going to be on those above to give him the players he wants. And I think that's right. But I do also think that all of those eyes should also be having a little look at him and just like thinking, you are one of the best coaches in the world. And this is a team that should have beaten Aston Villa. I'm sorry. I know there was injuries. I know Kulusevski was out with that, what we hope is a slight muscle injury. I understand that, and that was a blow. And there's other players obviously out as well. But I'm sorry, but that squad, the whole point in the summer was building a squad with 2 players in every position. And that squad out there, you had 2 of the best attackers in the Premier League in Kane and Son up there. You had Yves Bissouma, who's one of the best midfielders in the Premier League in recent years, yet Tottenham have somehow turned into a shadow of that player. There was enough quality on that pitch. The fans got what they wanted with the back line. There was no Eric Dyer in it. He was dropped to the bench after a poor display against Brentford. There's no Emerson Royale. That team, on paper, had everything. Brian Hill was given a chance as well, one of the most talented young midfielders that Spain has produced in recent years, or so people in Spain always said, and he just wasn't getting a chance. So I'm sorry, I don't buy this whole plucky Tottenham managed to put out a team. It's just it wasn't the case. They had 6 days to prepare for the game as well, which is normally when Conte does his best stuff on the Hotspur Way training pitches. But they didn't even look like they'd come close to beating Villa. I thought Villa were good. They obviously played in a style to counter, which is something Tottenham, can never complain about because that's a tactic they've used a lot. Excuse me. I thought they were clinical. I thought their goals were both clinically taken, albeit the first came from a rubbish error that we're going to speak about in a minute. I thought the second goal was really nicely worked. I like McGinn. Every time I've seen McGinn, I see a guy that he puts in good performances. Quite clever with the ball. I know Spurs have been linked with him in the past. I don't know how serious it ever has been, but he's got a bit of everything. I do quite like him, John McGinn. So I was just getting messages through at the same time. Just checking there weren't anything important that had to go in this video. Yeah. But I don't get it. I don't get it. And I think the biggest issue for me was this felt like one of those games that comes towards the end of a manager's reign. And that's the most worrying thing. It felt, I've seen these under Poch, I've seen them under Jose Mourinho, definitely saw them under Nuno. These games where there's no set plan on the pitch. You can't see what they're trying to do. They don't look joined up. They don't look like they know how to get the ball towards the opposition area. Some players maybe appear to be giving a bit more than other players. And that worries me slightly. That's when the vultures start to circle. And honestly, I would be stunned, especially if they don't get a result or something decent at Palace in midweek, especially when you look at it. I know you've got the FA Cup, but then you've got Arsenal, was it City? Arsenal, City, Fulham, then City again, isn't it? I would be stunned if we don't. This is the period where we don't start getting training is boring. Conte is overworking players. A fractured dressing room. There's discontent about his tactics. Because what happens in these periods is you get, let's say, it's not usually the players themselves, but it's the people around unhappy fringe players that aren't getting a shot. Suddenly, those little things leak and emerge, and maybe sometimes they're exaggerated, sometimes they're true. But you'll see it, honestly, you'll know this. Every single manager on their way out in the weeks before, and I'm not saying Conte's on his way out, just in case people are saying that, I'm just saying this felt like one of those games. It hopefully doesn't lead to becoming that. But yeah, you get these stories that are all the same. Honestly, they're pretty much cut and paste jobs, whoever the manager is, of training sessions becoming boring, or overworked, that's another one. Tactics being dull, lack of plan, all this sort of stuff. Honestly, if we don't see one of those in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'd be stunned. It's just what emerges. It's like a wildfire that can quickly spread, and it's down to Conte really to stamp out if he wants to, and get everything back on track. Because otherwise, as we've seen, history suggests it only ends one way. And it's such a boring time. It really is. It's so predictable and it's so boring. And also what comes next, last time especially, was an absolute... No, time before last was an absolute mess. Oh, that summer. So yeah, right. So that's a little bit of Conte. I am coming back to Conte. I'll wheel back round to him later on. But I just for a moment want to also have a little bit of a whinge, I guess. This is such a whingy video, I'm sorry. It's cathartic for me. Gets it out of my system. Writing is the start, and then I feel I have to verbally say a lot of these things as well. Players as well should not get off the hook. I felt Spurs' big players yesterday really let them down, I'm afraid. They did. And it was all of them. You know, obviously some individual errors, but I felt on the whole a lot of these big players who are the type of players that are up there with the best players in the world, and they need to be taking these games, hauling Spurs out of trouble. And they just didn't. They didn't at all. You know, this was a third home defeat out of 5 at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. It was starting to become a bit of a fortress under Conte. And now, honestly, it's like a, what do you call it, house made of chocolate. It just feels like it could kind of fall apart at any moment. I can't talk about chocolate. I've got so much for Christmas. It's unreal. I'm still working my way. Essentially, I'm eating my way out of a chocolate house. But yeah, these key players, it's down to them, I feel, to galvanise the team around them. I felt none of them did. If anything, I'd say it was the younger players on the day that actually quite impressed me. And not a lot did impress me yesterday, but you know, you look at, I thought Pat Matasar came off the bench for his debut for Spurs. And do you know what? I thought he was really bright. He made a few good interceptions. He was progressive. He was trying to get the ball up the pitch. He has the longest legs, I think, of any human being I've seen. His incredible legs. That sounded weirder than I wanted to. But clearly, you know, I'm wondering if he could really get a stride going. It could be a real kind of asset to him. He is a very long-legged individual. I like the look of him. I like the look of his legs. I like the way he plays. I think there's a lot of skill there. He's not, you know, I know he's a young player, so he's probably growing into his body as well still and everything, all of that. I'm sure his physique in 5-6 years is going to be very different. You know, but he doesn't look awkward or gangly. I actually think he looks very kind of elegant and skillful in the way he plays. Yeah, I liked it. I thought it was a really good... And, you know, I've told you in the last video, I think it was, that Conte's taken a real shine to him. And we're going to talk in a little bit. There's going to be a midfield dilemma, I think, against Palace. I do wonder who's going to appear alongside Pierre-Emile Højbjerg. Because, you know, has Sarr snuck up the pecking order above Skip? Don't know. I mean, he did come on before him yesterday, but then maybe that was more because he's probably slightly more attacking player than Skip. I say slightly, he's a lot more attacking player than Skip. You know, he's can play in attacking positions as well. But no, I thought he was good. I thought Bryan Gil, it was a classic eager to please performance. It had some nice moments. It had some of those moments where he wasn't strong enough and was knocked off the ball, but then to his credit, he would often try and get back and get the ball back. But, there was, I think there were enough positives in there to show that, you can't write him off as a Spurs player, maybe for the future rather than the now. And yeah, Conte gave him a bit of praise as well, which I think I've got somewhere in the quotes down here. And then even late on, just in the final, it ended up, they came on for the last 3 minutes of normal time, but then there was 7 minutes of added time. So they got about 10 minutes. I thought Oliver Skip and Jed Spence actually came on and were quite bright as well, albeit against a team that, is 2-0 up and kind of gone into a lower gear. But there was they showed desire, all these younger players, probably more so than some of the senior pros that are out there. Not all of them, but some of them. Even if the fact that they were brought on pretty much felt like Conte sending a message to the board, like, look what I've got to bring on. Look what, my previous team, Chelsea, would have been able to bring off the bench, and look what I have to bring on. I do think there's an element to that. I don't think he was particularly trying to do them any favours. I could be wrong, but it felt more like a message than anything else. But honestly, spare a thought for Christian Romero. Last week, parading the World Cup trophy with Lionel Messi and co around Argentina. This week, he's charging up the pitch almost in like striker positions just to try to get Tottenham up the pitch somewhere. I saw him getting some criticism, and after actually my player ratings, I looked back because I hadn't had a proper chance to look at the first goal back, and he was not good for the first goal. He was ball watching. But I actually felt, in terms of desire, for a guy that's just come back from the World Cup, I did think he was really going for it. I still maintain he's a player he is that kid in the playground who likes to leave his foot in, who likes to catch your ankle, who almost takes a bit of a pleasure. It sounds weird to say he takes pleasure from hurting people, but there's a little bit of he kind of relishes the physical stuff, especially as the other player gets. And I do wonder if that's why he picks up so many injuries, because of this desire to kind of make his presence felt when he makes a tackle and stuff. He did pick up his obligatory yellow card, although I actually felt it was a slightly harsh one. The referee had an iffy first half. I think all 3 centre-backs got booked at one point. I'd probably say Romero's was the harshest of them. Davies was one of those that looked like it could have been more dangerous had he actually got closer to the man. I know it caught him, but if you'll see the motion he did, if the 2 feet had come in closer to the player, then that could have been a far worse ending. And the Longley one, I'm trying to remember the Longley one now. Was it a tactical one? Might have been a tactical one. I can't remember now. It's honestly not an important part of the game, but there you go. But my biggest issue, I guess, the reason I was going to Romero was the fact that he was having to play up the pitch to get the ball up the pitch because it wasn't sticking. And that's with 2 of the best attackers in the Premier League, 2 of the best players in Europe, in Harry Kane and Son Heung-min. Yes, the service into them was poor, but both are players that can create something out of nothing. They are top class players. And they created really very little between them other than that Kane header that was cleared off the line, really. Harry Kane's a strange one because I don't want to be critical of him, really, because he's scored so many goals. And ultimately, the striker's job is to score goals, and he's done that job. But he just looked well off it yesterday. Obviously, second goal, it was him, if I'm correct, that lost the ball, which led to Villa breaking and having that nice move that ended with Douglas Luiz putting the ball, just kind of tucked it past Lloris. I would say he's been scoring the goals, but I wouldn't say his performances have matched anywhere near what he was doing last season, or obviously the season before. So, yeah, it's an odd one with him. He's been there when Tottenham need him. He's scored goals, but then you have days like yesterday where if there isn't a goal, the rest of his play was kind of left exposed there to see. And yeah, it wasn't great. And I do feel with Kane, I was saying this to George Sessions from PA, who sat next to me, I do feel that his selective pressing, and I think this is probably a deliberate thing based on a couple of things. I think it's based on Conte not wanting to wear him out because he's going to play pretty much every match and every minute, whether that's right or wrong. And I do think it's probably also based on previous injuries. I think it was George was saying that one of his injuries against Man City actually came from pressing. He injured himself. But I do feel that when Spurs are trying to press as a unit and maybe Kane isn't doing that, I guess it leaves a chink in that armour, doesn't it? It leaves a big hole through which the ball can kind of come through. And again, this isn't to criticise Kane because I do feel like it's a deliberate thing because of the minutes he plays and the toll it takes on his body. But you will end up seeing him reserving his energy for big attacking moments. When under Poch, when he was obviously more in, I don't want to say physical prime because, I do think he's probably, in the last 12 months, has been physically or fitness-wise very high. But I think maybe there's that, like I say, the concern about the injuries because I think earlier on, before he started getting those injuries, he would rampage around the pitch pressing. And that was part of what made the pressing style of that team so good was him leading it from the front. Whereas now, you're more likely to see... I think we've seen Bentancur rushing up the pitch. Saw Basuma and Højbjerg doing that at times yesterday. Even, like I say, Romero you'll suddenly see up there. And I think they're almost filling in that gap where Kane maybe isn't doing it. But yeah, no, he wasn't good last night. And then there's Sonny. I feel so sorry for Sonny because he's lost something at the moment. His confidence is, you can see it's on the floor. I think a lot of the basic things that he was doing so well and was always done so well have become hard for him at the moment. I think that's the real confidence kind of thing as well. And it's kind of spread across his game. This is the man that was the joint Golden Boot winner last season who was on fire. And as I said before the match, one Premier League game he scored in, one Champions League game he scored in, and that's all we've had. And it's not even like, with Sonny, I've always in the past, whether his performances dipped down or up or whatever, he was consistently providing goals and or assists. So you could always quantify what he was doing when you looked at that column or those columns. But now even the assists have dried up. I think there's only 2 in the Premier League, or maybe even 2 all season. Southampton open day of the season, assist. And the other one, I think I wrote it down here somewhere. Brighton, early October. So that is... It's a massive loss to Tottenham because he was such a big part. I think last season, I remember doing one of these videos when people were having a bit of a pop at him saying, okay, but if you look at this stretch of games, it was a ridiculous number of direct goal involvements, goals and assists combined, it showed that I think there was something like only 4 or 5 games across this long period of maybe 25, 30 games where he hadn't provided a goal or assist. So when you take those away, you notice it so much. There was this moment, look, we know Sonny, he's a happy guy, a smiling assassin almost on the football pitch. But at the moment, he looks like someone that's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. He really, really does. And there was this little moment yesterday when he lost the ball somewhere in, I think it was in the Spurs half, which unfortunately has become a bit of a trend at times this season. He lost the ball in his own half, and each time it happens, it kind of allows the team to suddenly counter. And Spurs, being a bit shaky and also lacking confidence in defence, they struggle with these things. But fair play to Sonny. What he did was he raced back, tracked back, and tackled the ball and got a nice cheer from the crowd. And then in that moment, he kind of took off that black protective face mask thing that he's got on, and he chucked it off the pitch. I saw a member of club staff had to go and get it and bring it back. And it felt like, ooh, what if this is a symbolic moment? Are we going to get kind of Sonny unleashed, unmasked, now free from the constraints of his mask? It must be uncomfortable to play football in. I can't imagine that's a nice thing to be able to play in. It must give you little bits of vision that are slightly... It must be ever so slightly, or even just sense that you are. And everyone's like, ooh, this is it. Now he's serious. It wasn't, unfortunately. it continued to lose the ball. He was dispossessed twice, gave the ball away 4 times with unsuccessful touches, which is more than anyone else on the pitch. It was this really, this moment that summed everything up late on in the game when it was passed out to him on the wing and it just rolled underneath his foot and went out of play, and you could just see him kind of slump. And it just said everything about where his confidence is at right now. And like I say, the basic thing is just trapping the ball, and it's not working for him right now. I do feel sorry for him because he's been such a sensational player for Tottenham. And he really should have been riding on the crest of a wave this season with the Golden Boot and having had the South Korea tour, back in his home like a hero, bringing his club back with him. But it's just felt like almost all of that has kind of contributed this weight of expectation on him rather than being something that he can use as, if you'll pardon the cheesy expression, the wind beneath his wings. And his runs, there's a lack of penetration. You've heard me say this a million times about Lucas Moura, and I'm sorry to repeat it, but the thing that's always frustrated me about Lucas Moura, and I think that's why his goals and assists are so low comparatively to his skill level, is that he does this thing where he puts his head down and he runs quite excitingly at pace past 1 or 2 players, and then he runs into a third person, and he'll give the ball away. And it's something that there's not a... Where I always felt the contrast between him and Sonny was in those moments, in that final moment, Sonny's decision-making was much better. He would often pick the right pass, or he would pick the right moment to shoot, and that's what kind of marks him out. And it's in the numbers. You know, I don't have to slate one player and praise another. It's there in the numbers. And I just feel like right now, Sonny's doing that. He's running into kind of dead ends. He's not making those correct final decisions in those important moments. I mean, there was that good example, I think I mentioned it earlier, where there's a nice little move, and then Sonny just had to cushion a pass into Kane's path, and then Kane was through and would have scored. You'd expect him to score, but Sonny just overhit it, and it rolled through to the goalkeeper. And it's little moments like that where, like I say, it's the basics. Something that for him just was his bread and butter. It was stuff that was so easy for him to do, and now he's not doing it. And to be honest, this is the first time that I've actually heard Conte say that he needs to improve as well. I've heard Sonny say it. Sonny's been very honest. You know, he admits that his performances and his form has not been to his standard. But it was the first time I've actually heard Conte say it. He was asked about that bench and having no attackers, which essentially forced him to put Bryan Gil on the pitch, Kulusevski's injury. This was his reply to that, where he mentioned Sonny within it. The situation is clear, and I think you can see our situation from the start of the season. I think he's talking about the attacking players and injuries there. We have up front Bryan Gil, who obviously he would have said Jill, who played a good game, but he's a young player, and you need to give young players time to become stronger physically. I'm pleased from what I've seen from him today in the game. Then there is Kane, Son, Richarlison and Kulusevski. When it happened that 2 of these are injured, and this season it happened a few times with Richarlison and Kulusevski, you're in trouble. Also, Sonny has to continue to improve. And it becomes difficult in this situation because if you ask me about the central defenders, they played a good game. The 2 midfielders played a good game. The wing-backs played a good game. Then we struggled a bit up front because we found a team defending really deep. If you have a solution on the bench to change the game, it's easier because you change the cards during the game. So yeah, it's actually interesting, the point you made about the central defenders. We were talking about this in the game because a few of us had to do player ratings after the game. And it was quite difficult to find critical things to say about the back 3. Because, you know, the first game was a complete horror show from Lloris. But obviously, Romero's ball watching, I kind of realised after watching close-up videos I didn't see during the game. But other than that, I actually felt they probably did a fair bit of good stuff. But a 2-0 scoreline, that's only going to kind of reflect on the defence as well. So, yeah, I kind of agree with him on that. Maybe less so on some of the other players you mentioned. But yeah, like I said earlier, I still think they had enough attacking quality in that team to do better. I think Kane and Son should have been better. I think a lot of the stuff, Matt Doherty had moments, but I felt he should have done better. Same with Perisic. I think Perisic had some good moments. I'd say too much of the play went through him on the left, and it became predictable. Basuma and Højbjerg, very mixed performances for me. I wasn't impressed with them, but we'll talk about the midfield in a little moment. I mean, actually, first, I just want to say this quote because, honestly, we had the press conference, but we had him talking to various different media outlets. I've been trying to collect all the little bits he said because he's said mainly the same thing to everyone, but he's sprinkled in these little different moments to some of them. So BBC, he was asked about, like, does he need one more attacking player? And obviously I've said, haven't I, in previous videos and articles that Spurs are, one of their priorities is a new attacking player this month. So he said when asked that question by the BBC, we have different characteristics. We don't have many players who are really good to beat the man. We don't have many creative players in our team. For sure today was really difficult to find space in the first half. So I disagree about players who are really good to beat a man. I think Kane can do that. I think Son can do that. Kulusevski when fit can do that. I think Brian Hill can do that. Lucas when fit can do that. Richarlison can do that. I mean, he may be saying with the injuries we don't have many, perhaps, but I do think all three of his attackers on the day can do that. I think Kane is maybe not someone you think of someone that can beat a man, but he actually can do it quite well. He's got this little kind of, it's less so skill, it's more kind of a strength and a little bit of a change up in pace, a little bit of acceleration. Creative players, well, it's been something I've been banging on about for ages. It's essentially Kane and Kulusevski, isn't it, who are probably creative, naturally creative players. But for some reason, Spurs keep spurning chances to sign these kind of players, and you know, is that the Conte system? Is that his? Is it because he doesn't normally use them in his system? Like we were talking about Eriksen coming in almost because he had to under Inter. I don't know. I don't know enough about his previous teams to really do a deep dive analysis on whether he actually uses creative players or not like that. But I do think there's enough at Spurs. There was enough yesterday at Spurs. I do think, well, I think you heard me say at the end of the transfer window that I kind of felt that was the one little missing piece that they didn't get. And yeah, I kind of touched on it there. Conte said he was pleased with the two central midfielders. I wasn't. Not that that matters. What do I matter compared to Conte? But I felt that both looked really sluggish. Højbjerg hasn't looked the same without Bentancur alongside him. Basuma, I don't know what Spurs, Conte, whoever you want to say, has done to Basuma. He's got this habit of letting players run in behind him. I think we saw it against Brentford. And yesterday, there was a moment which, I can't remember who it was, he just let the player run away from him, started to amble back, then realised he needed to run, ran back, made a late lunge, picked up a yellow card. That's his 5th yellow card of the season, which means he's suspended for the Palace game. So that's of no use to anyone whatsoever. Obviously, Bentancur, I mean, the way Conte was talking and the fact that, he was talking about having a scan at the weekend suggests that he's not likely to be back for Palace. Hopefully we'll get some kind of positive update. But if he's not, then you've got 22-year-old Oliver Skipp, 20-year-old Pape Matar Sarr. Who does he pick? That's a big ask against a physical, strong Palace side in a noisy Selhurst Park for some young player to come in alongside Højbjerg. Yeah, I was trying to think of anyone else who can fit in there. I think it would have to be. But then, Oliver Skipp has played a fair few Premier League games. For Pape Matar Sarr, maybe it would be a bigger ask. But for Oliver Skipp, he's been there. He's done that. He was playing alongside Højbjerg pretty well early on when Conte came in as well. So, who knows? Maybe it ended up being the making of him. But yeah, not good. And then there's Hugo Lloris. Oh, Hugo Lloris. I said earlier in the week, didn't I, that Spurs' summer plan, one of their summer plans in the transfer window is to secure the long-term successor for Lloris. Obviously turned 36 on Boxing Day, World Cup winner. First off, Hugo Lloris has saved Spurs from losing more points than I can even think of over the years. This kind of narrative that he's a bad goalkeeper or anything like that, it's not true. And Conte came out with like a glowing tribute for him before the game, which was unfortunately timed, of course. You don't just become the French goalkeeper and reach back-to-back World Cup finals, winning one just by luck. It doesn't happen like that. He has, honestly, there's been so many moments for Spurs where he saved the team. So many. However, there's no denying he also has a mistake in him. Of course, when you're a goalkeeper, these kind of moments get... they're even more noticeable because you're the last man behind before the ball reaches the goal. So if you make a mistake, it's pretty much, it's a much higher percentage that's going to result in a goal conceded. But he does do these moments, these little he can go on a long run of consistency and then he'll just have a moment, a bit like we were saying earlier with Sonny, where the basics suddenly desert him. And yesterday was, unfortunately, a big example of that. Often I'd say it's with his feet, but it can be his handling, and that was yesterday. I got a little stat here. Spurs have gifted the opposition 5 goals in the league this season through individual errors, and that's 2 more than any other side. And of those 5 goals, Lloris has been responsible for 3 of those individual errors. So yeah, like I say, I looked back at my player ratings about a month back for last season as an overall, and Lloris had a really high rating. He'd had a really consistent season last season. This one, not so much. Not so much. I think he's trying to remember. I think he started it off quite well, but yeah, has not managed to maintain that. And obviously, this was his first game back after the World Cup as well, and that was not a good moment. I mean, Douglas Luiz. It was a bouncing shot, yes. Would I say it was a really difficult shot to deal with? No. Should have gathered it in his arms, but it just kind of bounced off his chest, went out. Watkins took it. He rushed out to try and stop him, which he did well enough. But then obviously with Romero just watching on, everyone really just watching on, Watkins just plays it back to Buendia and he taps it into the net. And then you can see, as Conte said, the confidence just drained. It absolutely drained from those players around him. There was another moment, I think he did a missed kick later on, which suddenly Villa swarmed for and was, oh no, don't score from this because this is all going to come from a poor Lloris kick. And the trouble is days like this when it's only going to accelerate Spurs' need to find a new number one for the long term. It is, unfortunately. Lloris, he is a top goalkeeper, and hopefully he responds to this and kind of shows that there's still plenty of miles left in the tank. But you do obviously have to start thinking about the future. I think you do. With a 36-year-old, of course you do. But, like I say, it wasn't just him. All of Spurs' big stars, for me, kind of failed on the day. And even if just one of them had stepped up, you might have seen a different result yesterday. Because, you don't want that team slipping down that table. And it really could happen if they don't sort it out quite quickly. Right. Now we're at the bit where we turn to Daniel Levy. Daniel Levy. Oh, my goodness. Sitting there in his stadium, the stadium that he no doubt would feel would be his legacy at Tottenham Hotspur, there for years and years and years to come. And he's sitting there, and it was definitely the loudest I've heard such a chant at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Daniel Levy, get out of our club. Yeah, it was after Villa's second goal. It was a large number of people in the South Stand mainly. There was definitely quite a few people. I've heard some people trying to say it was, or thinking it wasn't too big a number. It was a lot. It was a proper loud chant. That is not a chant. To have that volume, I know it's a stand that's amplified, but that wasn't a chant from a handful of people. That was a chant from... It's difficult to quantify. It's difficult to guess. I'd imagine hundreds. I'd imagine. Purely because of the noise. And we're in the press box, which is probably our area is closer to the north stand. Obviously, we're in the west, but it's closer to the northwest corner than it is to the south, and we could hear it very loudly. And the TV screens in front of us instantly went to Levy sitting up in the box, looking very uncomfortable and awkward. I'd say this was the loudest I've heard that sort of stuff. There's been small little pockets of protest before. I remember the Aston Villa debacle. It was Villa again. Penultimate game of the season before last. It was the last home game. You might remember. It was the one where they had that horror show of a performance, but also afterwards this absolute bodged attempt to. They're supposed to have a lap of honour where the players went round. They lost 2-1. It was Ryan Mason, wasn't it? Caretaker charge. And it didn't really happen. Fans were told to stay behind, then told to leave. Then you started to get these little kind of things of Levy out and shouts and stuff. And it was very awkward before the players were like shoved out in tracksuits about half an hour later after loads of people had left. Oh, it was Tottenham Hotspur. It was a complete mess. That for me was probably the most vocal I've heard it in a match. Until yesterday. Yesterday was definitely the loudest. It just felt a little bit different. It involved more people. It was louder. And it, like I said earlier, it's a chant born of 2 decades worth of frustration with just one League Cup to show for it. Daniel Levy has delivered a magnificent stadium. It is. Every person that's ever goes there, I've had a friend that went there to watch, was it rugby recently? Journalists that come to cover the opposition that I know each week will just say, honestly, the most amazing stadium we've ever been to. You've got that. But as you'll constantly be told, you can't fit a stadium into a trophy cabinet. It doesn't work like that. And it's of little use having an incredible stadium if the football played within it is as dull as dishwater. It doesn't mean anything. And I think the obvious focus for attention is going to be Daniel Levy. And I do think, there's a fair old chunk of criticism that I do think he would have to accept is fair. How do I put this? I think the biggest issue with Daniel Levy, some might say it's not the biggest issue, but I think it's the reason for why he gets a lot of the flack. It's just... There's a lack of... it's the only word I can use. There's a lack of humanisation when it comes to him. He's very wary of the public arena. I've had loads of people tell me that. And because you don't really hear from him, because you don't really see him other than this man looking down upon his kingdom, there's no softening of his persona. There's no emotional connection to the fans, to anyone. Instead, it's almost, he becomes a bit of a caricature, doesn't he? You see many an internet meme of him. Usually there's money around him and stuff like that as well. He's almost become portrayed as like a Bond villain of sorts as well, and he's holding all the club's finances under his strict control. And I think a lot of this comes from the fact that people don't really know him. That's me included. That wasn't me saying, you don't know him, he's a wonderful chap. I have absolutely no idea what he's like on a personal level. He's you can only kind of get sense from speaking to others. He's a publicity shy man. I'm always told he's a workaholic who's happier being behind his desk, just getting on with stuff, than he is, in social situations like mingling with people and all this sort of stuff, schmoozing as they call it. And when he's in those situations, he's been described to me as quite awkward. I mean, even Poch said he's not an easy man, and Poch got on with him quite well. Went away on a holiday together, or he went away. He was invited to, wasn't it, Argentina, all the rafting and stuff like that with him. And my problem also lies with those around him. I just feel like this is only based on what I'm getting the impression of from what I see, is that people around him must be encouraging this lack of interaction with the fan base, with the wider public in general, with the media. maybe they've got this false sense of they're protecting him, but I actually think they're doing exactly the opposite. They're shoving him right in the way as a target, squarely in the firing line for angry fans. Honestly, you can count the in-depth interviews that Daniel Levy's done in the last 20 years, probably on one hand. I always remember being told that he did. It's called a round table when you sit down with a load of journalists. I was always told that he did one of those more than a decade ago, maybe even 15 years ago, and he wasn't happy with where it went and what his quotes taken out of context, something like that. And so it's never really happened since. You get the old one in a blue moon. You get sometimes the odd broadcast one. Often it's about the stadium or something like that. But we're all putting requests. All of us do to kind of talk to him. I think every pre-season, especially, I've said, well, he's out here. Can we sit down and have a chat? Never happened. The only thing I would say is in Korea. I don't know if I mentioned this at the time. In Korea, he unexpectedly turned up while we were having a chat within the Spurs hotel with various members of the Spurs staff. And he turned up, and it was a bit unprompted, unexpected. And he sat down, he spoke. He was there for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. He was clearly very wary, as I said earlier, of anything that he said being turned into something. It wasn't an interview. It was literally a guy turning up and having a chat with was it 5 of us journalists were there. It was almost, I think, more like a, thanks for coming, everyone. I'm going to acknowledge that. And, perfectly personable, pleasant, didn't really say loads. But, yeah, there was definitely this guard up, this wariness of talking about anything that maybe we could take away from it. Like I say, perfectly pleasant, but that was kind of it. It was all very much, it was appreciated, I think, by everyone. But definitely there was this wall up. And I do feel that, I'm not saying it's me, I'd love to be able to be the one that does it, but I do feel like someone needs to sit down with him and just have a long, in-depth interview and almost give him the chance, because he's had no real chance, or he hasn't taken any real chance to explain the things he does. Whether that's a decision that has been met with scorn or disgust or whatever, and he could allow greater context for that decision, explain why it was taken, or even put his hands up for certain mistakes that he's made, during a long era as chairman, or, dare say, I even say it, apologise maybe for things that have happened. There must be decisions he's made in the past where he's thought, yeah, that wasn't right. I really wish if I could go back I could change that. There must be. But there's no opportunity to do this. There's no connection with the fan base. There's no, this is a guy that the fans really only know from, the chairman's message when you see it in the programme in the last home game of every year. That's kind of where you see him. The financial statements, which we're still waiting for the latest one, there'll probably be a little bit from him within that as well, talking about various stuff. And even those messages, they will be heavily edited. There'll be sections like whether he even writes it in the first place or whether it's dictated to someone. I don't entirely know how the process works. I just know that by the time it reaches that page, the website screen, it will have been vastly kind of worked on. And that's not giving a true sense of someone in a moment. It isn't. And it is. All of this, it detaches him from everything. It makes him a figure that people will put their angst, anger, whatever you want to call it. It does. And like I said earlier, he does. He kind of looks like this king looking down upon his domain. And the little people that we all are underneath, are going to get angry. And you're going to, especially when things are going wrong and you can see mistakes being made at the very top, that's where the problem's going to come. And, I'm sure no doubt he does lots of great things, as in good things like charity things. Like the club have a fantastic foundation. I'm sure he does lots of wonderful things through that to help people. But we have no idea because we just don't know anything. It's almost become like this mysterious figure. I mean, don't even get me started, obviously, on Joe Lewis in the background behind that. But, you've got Daniel Levy first, and he has just become this figure, like a caricature, and that only leads to what you get and the chants of yesterday. Like I say, I can only presume people around him think they're protecting him and are doing the exact opposite. And the fans have got every right to be disgruntled because you see the comparative lack of spending compared to the other big boys. You see promises of a stadium becoming a game changer because of the revenue that it will drive and the reason for moving from White Hart Lane to this new stadium. But then if the money isn't being spent that correlates then to this huge increase in revenue, what's the point? And then there's like the stadium sponsorship. Why has that still not come in for the stadium as well? Because that would give another massive boost as well. But there's a complete lack of trophies. So yes, one trophy in 20 years and a League Cup as well, it being that trophy. Absolutely right that people should be unimpressed by that. And mainly just the bewildering decisions that are made at times. I mean, what I find bizarre is that for a guy that I know at the stadium, so many people have told me this, he would micromanage every little detail, like from little finishings on a wall or a door in every room in the stadium, a £1 billion stadium. Yet you feel like when decisions are made about on the pitch stuff, there's no such plan. There's no such attention to detail whatsoever. He's flip-flopped from contrasting philosophies, ideas, plans, just constantly. So from manager to manager, there's not even a set process. And again, whether that's his decision, whether that's people advising him, I have no idea. But just look at this list, right? He's appointed Glenn Hoddle, Jacques Santini, Martin Jol, Juan de Ramos, Harry Redknapp, Andre Villas-Boas, briefly Tim Sherwood. I always call him a caretaker manager when technically he was given a more permanent role, but it just lasted very briefly. Mauricio Pochettino, Jose Mourinho, Nuno Espirito Santo, and now Conte. So that's 11 managers or head coaches, whatever they wanted to be called, in just over 2 decades. That's on average one manager every other year. So when you've got the chairman as Daniel Levy as the only non-variable, the constant within that, that's where people are going to latch on and criticise for those exact reasons. And like I say, he's just lurched repeatedly, awkwardly from like a Borussia Dortmund style model I was talking about last week, developing young players under a progressive young coach. But then he'll flip-flop with the very next manager to like a misguided attempt to, be some kind of like Poundland version of Chelsea, where he'll appoint a much older, experienced, trophy-winning, seems to be former Chelsea manager, and they've come in and been like, well, this isn't Chelsea. this is what I thought. This is, although more worryingly, maybe this is what they thought. Maybe they just felt they could change it. But yeah, they're coming into a club where they cannot do the same thing that they did at Chelsea because the resources are entirely different. Everything's different. I mean, there's more Conte quotes to come. Sorry, this is going to be a long one today. I'm so sorry. But there's a lot to talk about. I've realised we've already reached the hour mark and I haven't really dug into the Conte stuff that I want to get into yet. So I'm sorry. It's maybe one you have to watch in a couple of sittings. I don't get it. I mean, if you just even take the Pochettino, Mourinho, Nuno, Conte era, that's the perfect roller coaster of a lack of plan or a vision or an understanding of what your club is. Just from one year to the next, just just honestly, you've seen me get more and more frustrated with every passing year. And we had that in the season message when Daniel Levy talks about Tottenham DNA, and it's a word that's been used a fair few times, kind of pushed out as this buzzword of the club. I don't think anyone really knows what Tottenham's DNA is. We knew what it was in the past in those glory years, the double winning side, the Bill Nick era, Arthur Rowe before that, the push and run side. Even, the flair, I guess, of the Hoddle years and stuff in the 80s and things like that, and UEFA Cup winning. But what is Tottenham's DNA now? I honestly couldn't tell you. I don't think anyone in that club really knows what it means because the decisions that are being made off the pitch or about on the pitch matters make no real sense. Yeah. And the other thing that's weird is they're a club that in the modern era has no trophies or one League Cup, but they're also a club with a state-of-the-art academy that has no discernible pathway to the first team. That's quite an achievement to not have either. Often a lot of teams that maybe you don't expect to win trophies, at least you can look at their academy and say, oh, look at the brilliant players they're producing that are constantly coming through. Spurs aren't doing either. They're just in this middle road of, I guess, mediocrity, where they're not really creating, developing players that the fans can then connect with, but they're not winning trophies either to warrant the lack of that. It's a bizarre club. It really is a bizarre club. And I think what will only be more galling is you look down the road and you can look at Arsenal, and they're kind of making the model that Spurs had in the Pochettino era work. And I don't think it's any shock, because there's been that little bit of extra financial backing that was needed to get it over the line. And that's what you're seeing. Look, I don't have to remind you of those 2 transferless windows that Spurs had at an absolutely crucial time. I've seen some people say it's 3 transfer windows. I'm pretty 99% certain it was 2. Because you had Lucas Moura in the January of 2018. Then I think it was the next summer and January window where nothing was done. And then the following one was the Tanguy, Lo Celso, Sessegnon, Jack Clark window, which felt so good at the time and later didn't really work in hindsight. So that will be especially galling, I think, and maybe eye-opening, hopefully, is that you look at what Arsenal have done, you look at that they've taken that model. It's different to the Wenger years, the Arteta era, and obviously he's been given that little bit more time, I guess, like Pochettino was, but also that extra little backing. And now you're seeing, I know some Arsenal fans. I've got some friends that are Arsenal fans. I don't think they've ever felt as connected with their club as they do right now, for a long time anyway. And that's, I feel like, where Spurs were in the Pochettino height, I guess, the peak of what he did. But then, like I say, Arsenal just have gone that extra bit with the finances and the right transfers and the right players at the right time. And now they've created this very young, exciting team playing fantastic football, top of the league by a way. Whether they stay there is another thing, but you wouldn't bet against them the way they're going at the moment with the momentum they've got, even with the injuries that they're dealing with as well. Galling and eye-opening, I think that needs to be. To look at them taking what Spurs have done, but doing it in the correct way with that little extra financial boost that it needed. And the problem for Levy is that right now he's got a manager in Conte who he will not go quietly into the night, to paraphrase Bill Pullman's presidential speech from Independence Day. He will point that if it all goes absolutely pear-shaped at Tottenham, there's only one direction Conte's kind of finger's going to be pointing, and it's you, Daniel Levy. That's what it's going to be. And Levy must know that. When they were signing Antonio Conte, they knew that he's a volatile man. He's a loud man. He's an emotional man. And he's a man that, let's be honest, as most managers do, they're probably not going to accept their part in anything that goes wrong. And I think Levy will be the clear and obvious target, because Conte will know that the fans, or a certain section of fans, pinning the blame on Levy. And look, I do agree. I think there's blame to be apportioned there. I think there's blame to be apportioned all round. So don't worry, honestly. It's so mad. The way these things work, social media, you have to only think one person's wrong. I don't think that's the case. I think there's a lot of people wrong in this scenario. Honestly, I think that blame is shared out. Shovel it and share it in every direction, because there's a lot of it. It's going to end on, I say end, there's still a fair bit for me to get through here. I am so sorry. I'm sorry, this is a long one. I saw under a message under the last video. I was like, why can't you say all of this in 20 minutes or something? If I could, I would. Honestly, there's so much to get through. Conte. He's a master of saying everything he wants while pretending that he's saying absolutely nothing at all. If there's a transfer that he wants or to be had, questions about his future, he would just turn up that dial, turn up the pressure to his advantage. Most managers do it, but few, honestly, with the regularity of how Conte does it. And yesterday, after a defeat that was as much his fault and the players as anyone else's, he spent a long time after the match telling the media that it wasn't really his fault. And he'd warned everyone months ago that the Spurs were going to be rubbish. It's not my fault, Gov. Despite the fact that, we were talking about the chance to Levy, but Conte was getting it in that match as well. Like I say, there's no Antonio chance at the moment. There were boos at the full-time whistle. There's a couple of boos at half-time, but nothing like there has been. But there were big boos at the full-time whistle. When he took Matt Doherty off and put on Emerson Royale, there were big boos when that happened as well. That was his decision that was getting booed. When Jed Spence was warming up, there was like a big cheer for him, or a little kind of cheer for him then. And then when Jed Spence came on towards the end, it was the biggest cheer of the day. And that, I'm sorry, but Antonio Conte, unless he's living in a dream world, he needs to be aware that was a cheer because he's finally done something that the fans want. It's like they feel that there's a blind spot there when it comes to young players. It's almost like I'm going to send this message rather than actually see if it works. So I get it. I don't want a young player. I don't want to, he's got some comments a little bit later, which for me, a little bit disrespectful about players that are bought. And I'll let you make up your mind about that. But it's almost like, if I play this player and they really do well, then I'm going to look like a mug, so I'm not going to do it. It kind of just feels very obvious. And I felt like as soon as that final whistle went, he switched into full-on PR mode. He did. He spoke to Sky Sports and BBC for 6 minutes apiece for their broadcast interviews, which is normally about 2 or 3 at the most. So he did double the time talking to them. He did the rounds of all the radio outlets. I'm going to talk about a 5 Live interview a little bit later as well. A little bit later, honestly. I don't know where we're going to get, how long this video is going to be. I'm sorry. I can only apologise. Yeah. And then he came down to us finally in the press conference almost an hour after the final whistle, which is a pain in the backside because we get kicked out of the stadium a certain time. So if he comes down really late to the press conference, we don't really have the full amount of time to write everything up afterwards. But when he came down to the press conference, he spent 12 minutes answering what was essentially 4 questions. Long answer. And the press conference was just drawn to a close by the press officer because he'd spoken for so long and there was loads of us waiting to ask questions. I didn't get to ask a question because a couple of the first journalists just kind of fired in their question with a quick follow-up, and he spent so long answering those, it was like, right. So there was a common theme. If you look across all his answers to all the outlets, there was, the process needs more time. Don't expect anything exciting from Tottenham. It's going to be a fight, a struggle. Last season was a miracle, as I said earlier. He needs better and older players rather than young players. He said that a lot indirectly. More money needs to be spent. Indirectly, he said that as well. And Tottenham are not like the other clubs he's managed, So this was the one, I felt the one he said to Sky kind of explained his position probably the best out of it all. He slightly mangled the message a bit in his press conference one. But to Sky, he said, the message is always the same. I have never spoken about our team that this season we're going to be competitive to fight to win. From the start of the season, I said we're trying to build a solid foundation because if you want to become title contenders, if you want to win something, you need to have a solid foundation. That means your squad is 13, 14 players strong, and then every year to put 1 or 2 players, but important players, to improve the quality. And this means 60, 70, 80 million pounds. In this way, you improve the quality. At this moment, we are creating the foundation because we don't have the foundation. We need to find 13 or 14 players. We're trying to create this and then add important players, not normal players. In every season, we want players who make the difference. Otherwise, you have to go to young players to develop them to wait. Ooh, how horrible. You know what I mean. I always say the truth in my life. I don't want to create illusions for people. The club very well knows what I think, and the club is 100% thinking the same. Maybe it is good to send this message outside to the media. Maybe, because someone may think we couldn't be title contenders. When you want to fight to win something, you need experienced quality players, but strong. We didn't create solid foundations already, and we are doing this. This is the first work we have to do. When you finish this work and need time, then you start to add important players to add quality, and the players with us continue to develop. Then you become a title contender like Chelsea, Manchester City, Arsenal, who started this process 3 years ago. We have to face the situation in the best possible way and know which is our level. We have to try, like last season, to overcome our level. There is only one way to push ourselves, and everyone has to go in the same direction. Then the club will speak very well to the fans to say which are the targets. No, Antonio, they won't, because the club don't speak to the fans. They don't. This is what I've just been saying. They all gather behind the manager, all trying to fit in behind his shape, whoever these people may be. And they just hope that the fans don't notice them kind of behind him. And then the manager, whoever it is, always has to try and explain as much as they can about decisions that are made by the club and what they're doing and what their plans are and what their hopes are. And that manager has to also do that without trying to upset the people who pay his wages. Even Fabio Paratici. Fabio Paratici, club's director of football, managing director of football, when he came in, you'll remember me saying, when he was at Juventus, he would speak most weeks. I think like Sky Italia, maybe even before games, would have interviews with him each week. He was a very public face. He's come to Tottenham. Honestly, he's joined that reclusive gang of people behind the scenes that you'll never know really exist. And I think there was a hope that he would come in and be the face of Tottenham. He would explain a lot of these things. He would bridge that huge gaping chasm between the club's hierarchy and the actual fans. Instead, honestly, I can tell you one finger, he did one press conference, and that was the week Conte joined. It was the pre-match Europa Conference League match against Vitesse. And he did that press conference because Conte had been appointed, but technically wasn't allowed to coach yet or something. So he had to do that. And then obviously once after transfer window shut, you get this little kind of video club interview, which doesn't really, it says a bit, but it doesn't say too much because obviously it's a club interview. It's going to be very much set in parameters. Honestly, they've taken one of the most accessible public speaking football figureheads in Italian football and they've just made him fade into the background. But there you go. Paratici's main job, though, rather than talking, of course, will be getting these transfers, getting Conte to kind of provide these foundations he speaks about. He did an interview with Five Live, which is a bit of an unfortunate gut firearms comparison, which I think that people were kind of wincing about when he said it. This is the interview quite quickly. The club knows very well what I think, or this answer. The club knows very well what I think. I have one thing, and I don't know if it's positive or negative, but I like to tell the truth. I don't like to tell lies or good lies. This is Five Live. For this reason, if you remember, I said at the start of the season, pay attention because this season will be really difficult because we're in a moment that we didn't have good solid foundations. We're continuing to create these foundations. Before building a solid foundation, I have to wait. We have to wait. And I think we're in this moment where we're trying to build this foundation with the 12, 13 players, reliable players, strong players, then with young players to develop this situation to improve. This is the bit that's a bit different. And then you are ready every season to sign one or two players, but important players, quality players. To spend money in this way, you improve the quality of your team. Otherwise, if you sign 7 players and you spend 60 million, it means you're spending maybe 10 million on every player. Usually when you spend this money, the level of the player is medium, no? Or a young player that you have to wait to develop. The level now is very, very high. And the level improved because Manchester United invested a lot of money and they already had important players and then put other players. Chelsea did the same, Manchester City did the same, and Arsenal did the same. You always see one following the others. Also, if you invest 50 million or 60 million, then the other arrives with a bazooka and you only have a little gun compared to their bazooka. So, yeah, other than the clunky gun analogy stuff, that's the bit I kind of felt was a little bit disrespectful. It's essentially saying if you get a player for cheaper, they're not very good. I don't think that's true because you get Perisic for free, and I think he's been a very good signing. I think Bissouma was cut price, and he'll be a terrific signing eventually. But, you know, he is essentially a £60 million player that they got for half the price because he was in the last year of his contract. And I also feel like Conte is kind of forgetting the fact that Spurs signed him, Richarlison, for £60 million. So he is exactly one of those important players. So, yeah, I do feel like he glossed over there, but I don't think it does any favours for the likes of, you know, Jed Spence, Destiny Udogie for next season as well. You know, these players that were yes, I of course, if you're spending silly amounts on a player, then you're expecting a very good game-changing player. But then Bentancur was signed for 17 million, well, maybe 15 million up front, but it could be 20 million. Is he a medium player? No. Dejan Kulusevski signed on loan for $2.5 million for that first year. Is he a medium player? No. So I do think it's the classic Conte blanket view on stuff that doesn't really work. And as I say, Arsenal having a young squad of players kind of is this thorn in the side of Conte's whole only ready-made players can win titles mantra. It doesn't really work. And if they win the title, obviously that really does ram that home. I mean, Conte would say that Arteta's had the time to develop that, but it's a different kind of one. I think my biggest issue with it all, and I've said this before, but it felt even more so yesterday, is that he harps on, Conte, about people having patience, understand the process. And he even said yesterday, like, I have to wait, we have to wait. And he just seems utterly bewildered that the fans and the media might not share that same thinking. Yet he shows absolutely no indication whatsoever that he wants to stick around and show that patience that he's preaching to everyone else. I think that's my biggest issue with it. Every given opportunity Conte has to speak about his long-term future, beyond next summer, it just swerves away from the topic, or even worse, he uses that overused line of, we'll find the best solution for everybody. He just acts like a man... He does. He's calling for time and patience for everyone around him when the results aren't going well, or performances of his team aren't great. Yet he never gives the air of a person that actually has that patience himself, which is obviously, like I said earlier, is hypocritical. It does. He creates this air of a man who's just waiting for a better opportunity to arise at times. A club with a vacancy that has a shorter pathway, a quicker pathway to silverware. And I've said this before, but it does. I find it baffling that a man with his incredible coaching qualities, I think he is a terrific training ground coach as well, yet all the talks constantly of ready-made signings and players being able to play here and now, and it's the job of the academy to develop players for him who are ready, not for him to play his part in that development. It sounds like a computer gamer who can't complete that new game they've bought without having the cheat codes. It's like playing Football Manager with an editor where you're pumping 500 million into it and up your levels of levels of the club so that big players will sign for you. It's like playing everything on a cheat mode. And I think he's better than that. I don't think that has to be his go-to thing. And even at one point in the press conference, almost felt like he used a line that to me is kind of just like, ugh. It almost felt like he was saying, like he was helping out Spurs. All right, lads, come in, I'll give you a little hand while I'm here. It's within this one. You might hear it. I know that what there is a reality because I am the coach. I live the club every day. I know what is the situation. I know the vision of the club. The club knows very well what are my thoughts on the situation. The situation was very clear. I continue to work and to improve and to help you to improve the club, to create a solid foundation and then to develop. Almost as if to say, yeah, I'll come in and give you a hand, lads. Yeah, then it's all yours. You crack on. It's like, oh, thanks, Mr. Advisor. At the start of the season, I was very, very clear with the club. I said, okay, we can be competitive to win, but try to continue to improve, but in the way that we can do it. Because also, you have to know that there are clubs who can invest 200 million or 300 million, and others with different policies, and I repeat, you have to respect the policy. The policy has to be very clear with all people, otherwise we create a situation that's not positive for the environment, to create expectations that are not realistic, honestly. And you'll notice, he says policy, but he says it like the word politics. But he means policy. But he says it every time. He even warned, he warned of worse things ahead. He said, I repeat this from the start of the season. I know very well I was expecting this moment. Now we have to start to fight strong because the situation in this league, you can slip quickly. I spoke also with my players. You have to pay attention to fight because from start to the end, the road is not long. You can slip quickly if you're not prepared and not humble to understand the situation very well. If you ask me if I'm scared, I'm not scared. I believe in my work. I believe in these players. But don't ask me for things I cannot promise you. This is only going to create an illusion and create dreams, a moment that you have to be realistic. If you're realistic, you know the situation and you face the moment in the right way. So essentially Conte is saying, who knows, by March we could be 16th or worse. Look, no, I get it. I'm being flippant. I get what he means. They've got to sort it out. They can't just think that they can coast through matches or that everything will be all right. They have to fight and work hard. I know what he's saying. But yeah, it really is. Oh, the stuff after the game. It was so much stuff that just felt like, oh, listen to a lot of the things you're saying. I get what you're trying to say, but please have also some accountability yourself as well. Because I'll always say it, the Tottenham Conte relationship is such a strange one. It's like a marriage of convenience without any party, really having much in common. It's so strange. And I was thinking yesterday, if there were to be this divorce in this marriage, where do Spurs go next? I know there's a jilted former flame in Pochettino. Obviously, you kind of get this impression that he might be waiting by the phone for that call to come back and then finish unfinished business. I think the song they played at the end of the game was almost like, in case to drown out any booze afterwards, was something like Getting Down to Business, which I thought was quite ironic, since none of that was going on. And then the other way they could maybe go is, obviously we know Thomas Tuchel is free and available right now. But, is that again continuing that Poundland Chelsea imitation by doing another, sorry to sound harsh, but only because he was sacked, a Blues cast-off? Another player, Conte obviously sacked by Chelsea, Mourinho sacked by Chelsea, obviously didn't come straight to Tottenham, either of those via. But is there a point where, he's a brilliant coach. I actually think he would be good because he has worked wasn't he former Dortmund manager as well? So he actually knows that other style. So yeah, I'm not saying that actually it would be a bad fit. But at what point do people outside the club look at that and say, again, that would be the fifth former Chelsea manager you've appointed during the ENIC era? That would be weird. It's like feeding off the scraps of another more successful club. Is that a DNA? I don't think it is. It is. It's about having an identity. And it's difficult to know what Tottenham Hotspurs is anymore. And that's the saddest thing for me. I don't know what Spurs' identity is. I don't see it on the pitch. I don't see it off the pitch. And so it just needs to be a clear direction. And that obviously comes from above. It comes from every level. It comes from above. I don't know. So there you go. Sorry, we're hitting the 90-minute mark. This is essentially like a movie-length one. But yeah, I'm going to go. My voice is going to go in a minute as well. But yeah, honestly, there are so many places that blame can be apportioned out. Like I say, at the very top, with Daniel Levy and the board, with Antonio Conte and some of the decisions he makes and the lack of accountability he takes for some of these things. The players, the big players, the key players. There's got to be a reaction against Palace, because if there's not, this is a slippery slope we're heading on. And like I say, those stories about training sessions and unhappy fringe players, they're going to come out, because every club, however good you are, even Poch, when he had the most harmonious squad I've probably ever seen, there was still some on the fringe of it that were not happy. And towards the end, we got those training stories as well. They will come. They will come. The baffled at tactics stories, unless somehow Spurs bring this all together. Conte committing would be a good thing. Committing to the future. It would draw a line. It would tell everyone, the likes of Harry Kane, who must be wondering what the hell he's doing, kind of thing. I think everyone would feel like, okay, this is where we're going. But then obviously the caveat to that is, or the flip side, is that Spurs have to convince Conte that they're going to sign these ready-made players for him as well going forward. There's so many ifs, buts and maybes. And this is what it all comes down to. Like I said, where's the identity? What is there for the fans to connect with? What is Tottenham Hotspur? Leave you on that note. Right, I'm going to head off. As always, stay healthy, stay safe, look after yourselves. And I shall catch you later, hopefully, with some better, more positive stuff to talk about in the future. Goodbye.